Hello YouTube, this is Noah, and today I'm going to be doing a beginner's guide to building a RetroPie. For those who aren't familiar, a RetroPie is basically a Raspberry Pi computer running the software called RetroPie. And what it's capable of doing is emulating lots of gaming consoles and handhelds, essentially from first to fifth generation. And it does it pretty well and is able to play any ROM from those games, assuming that you have the ROM on hand. Because of the nature of legality with ROMs, I will not be doing the ROMs in this video. You will need to obtain them through other means, whether you already have them or downloading them. But I will not be doing that in this video, just because it's kind of a touchy subject with the legality of ROMs. So to get started, what you're going to need is a Raspberry Pi. What I have here is the Raspberry Pi Model 3B Plus. Feel free to use any Raspberry Pi model. It should work just fine with whatever model you choose, be it the Raspberry Pi 0, the 1, the 2, the 3, or the 3B Plus. Nextly, you're going to need a SD card. I've chosen a Samsung 32GB Evo Select. So that's just my personal choice. Feel free to choose more storage, less storage, or a slower or faster card. I recommend, however, at least 20 megabytes per second write speed, just so your games don't take forever to copy over and to load on your Raspberry Pi. And the only other thing you really need is an HDMI cable, assuming that you have some sort of interfacing device. So you're going to need a keyboard or a gamepad in order to select stuff in the Raspberry Pi, obviously. So you're going to need that, and as well as a monitor, so you can actually see what the Raspberry Pi is outputting. So you can either buy a touchscreen monitor or some kind of monitor that plugs into the Raspberry Pi itself, or you can just buy an external monitor and use that's what the HDMI cable would be for. But those are really the only two things you need are the Pi and the SD card, and then the way of seeing and controlling it, you need a interfacing device and some sort of monitor to view the output, and preferably speakers if you're going to be playing these games, just so you can hear what you're playing. But I have got a whole lot of things today, and I have a lot to show you, a lot to teach you, and it will be a longer video, so please do check in the description for timestamps. I'll be splitting this video up into the parts overview, the unboxings, and the building of the Raspberry Pi. So all of those timestamps will be down in the description, so you can find exactly what you're looking for and don't have to waste time watching video that with stuff that you've already seen. So without further ado, I'm going to start unboxing the accessories that I have picked out along with the Raspberry Pi itself. Alright, so here is the Raspberry Pi Model 3B Plus, and we're just going to be taking it out here. It's actually kind of strange how this is packaged. I believe you open it like that. I did try to tear it there before, but I guess that's not how it's supposed to be opened. And this looks like some sort of seal to keep you from buying a model that's already been opened, because if it's already been opened, that seal would have been broken, or you'd see the tear here, I guess. But regardless, here is the Raspberry Pi 3B Plus. The 3B Plus is very similar to the Model 3B, aside from the slightly different placement of the Pi logo here. If I can focus on that, it's very small etching in there, but there is a Raspberry logo right there, and that would be placed somewhere here on the board with the Model 3. And the 3B Plus adds the addition of dual band Wi-Fi and metal covers for the processors, just for better heat dissipation. So that's really the board overview right there. Sorry, it was kind of out of focus. It has 4 USB ports for controllers or any other interfacing devices, an Ethernet port, headphone jack, an HDMI port, a micro USB in order to charge it, or sorry, not charge it, power it. And it's got connectors here for you to connect other devices such as fans or other screens, if you're so inclined to. Depends on really what you're building. But for our Raspberry RetroPie that we're building, it shouldn't matter too much. And also in there is the documentation along with the barcode for the Raspberry Pi. For our purposes, it's not really necessary to view the documentation, but you can feel free to read over it if you do end up buying the Pi for yourself. And like I said before, this RetroPie works with all kinds of forms of Raspberry Pi. I only chose the nicest model here because I don't want to upgrade in the future. I wanted to get the best of the best for the Raspberry Pi. And on to the next accessory, we have the SD card. Alright. And most SD cards nowadays will include an adapter, so you can get it into your PC. Not all of them include it, but if you don't have a micro SD card reader on your PC, or an SD card reader on that, for that matter, make sure to pick one up because you will need one in order to transfer files over and set up the disk image on your Raspberry Pi. But here is the SD card itself, little itty bitty micro SD, and here is the adapter that I'll be using to plug it into my computer. So I will set that to the side for now. And I forgot to do this before, but here is the weight of the Raspberry Pi for those of you who are interested. It will be off to the corner right over here. And it's going to be in grams, so it looks like about 49, almost 50 grams for the Raspberry Pi. And as far as size goes, I can measure it for you right here in millimeters. So the Raspberry Pi appears to be about 87 millimeters long, about 57 millimeters, 56 millimeters wide, and looks to be, at its tallest point, it's going to be about 19 millimeters. So there you go for those of you who are interested in the dimensions of the Pi itself. Alright, so this is a custom case that I picked up off of Amazon. Most of the cases that I looked at were not really desirable to me. I wanted something that had a good fit and finish, something that looked sleek and it didn't draw too much attention, and this was exactly what I was looking for. This is the Eleduino Raspberry Pi case, and the cool thing about this is it actually includes a power supply, which is one of the things you're going to need to power the Raspberry Pi. It's important to pick a power supply that has the right amperage so your Raspberry Pi doesn't become underpowered while you're using it, because if it becomes underpowered, you have a chance of corrupting your SD card and an accidental shutdown. So the one that I recommend would be any power adapter that is capable of outputting 2.5 amps. As you can see right there, might be a little small, but it's gonna be right there. And this one's 5 volts, but the voltage shouldn't matter too much. But what's really important here is the amps. So just make sure you pick up a 2.5 amps power supply. And this particular charging cable has a button to toggle on and off. Really nice and clicky so that you can tell when your Raspberry Pi is being shut off or shut on. It looks like when it's slightly depressed, it is on, and when it's completely undepressed, it is off. So I will be setting that off to the side, but that's what you're going to be using to power your Raspberry Pi. And inside the bigger Eleduino case, we have the smaller one, and this is where the actual case is itself. And I really like this case. I'm sure you'll see why in just a second. But it's really sleek and minimalist. Doesn't take up a very big footprint, which is perfect for what I wanted. Let's focus here. Alright, got a very, very tiny instruction manual explaining how to put it together, but don't worry, I will be demonstrating how to put this case together later in the video. Comes with a case badge that says Raspberry Pi. This is for the case itself. I think it might be yeah, it looks like some kind of sticker, maybe. I'm not sure if I like that. I'd rather just something that slides in and out, maybe, but I might have to settle for the sticker that says Raspberry Pi. Here's the sides of the case, and the cool thing about this case is it has all of the ports labeled, so you can see your net port, your USB ports, TF port, and on the bottom here it's got power in, HDMI, and audio video cable. And there's the GPIO for if you have an external monitor. inside here looks like the silicone feet to make sure the base, oops, sorry, to make sure the base doesn't slide around on flat surfaces. And then you also got some itty bitty heat sinks that I actually won't be using because I have a custom heat sink that I will be using instead, just because tinier ones don't tend to have lower quality heat dissipation, so I would stay away from those. You don't have to have as much heat dissipation as the custom heatsink that I've gotten for the video, but I would normally try and stay away from these tiny ones just because when you're running heavier tasks on the Raspberry Pi, they won't do as well at dissipating the heat. And for my particular build, I will not be using a fan. That's another way you could get rid of the heat, is by plugging in a fan into your case. I know a lot of cases are fan compatible. So if you wanted to go that route, you could use these and a fan, and you would get just as good thermals. But I wanted to go for a passive cooling solution so that this thing is entirely silent. The case actually is really simple to put together. The Raspberry Pi goes there, this part slides in, and these four screw down, keeping the case together. So I will be showing you how to do that in the build portion of the video. And I just have one more accessory, or two more accessories here with me. So I will pull those out now. Alright, here we go. These are the iNNext game controllers, as it says here on the box. I accidentally bought the colored buttons version rather than the ones that look similar to the SNES button color with the two shades of purple. So they do also sell that version where it has the purple buttons here rather than the yellow, red, blue, green. But this was a little bit cheaper, I believe, and I didn't see the purple ones until I already had this one ordered. So it's just something I'll have to live with. I may end up getting Bluetooth SNES controllers in the future instead of wired ones, but for now I will just be using this 2-pack, and I'll be using these as the controller for the device. They so far feel pretty quality, actually, better than I was expecting, really. The buttons feel nice and solid, the D-pad feels pretty nice. Doesn't feel too mushy, really. Has a nice click to it. I feel like these will work just fine for my purposes. Alright, and we have one final part here for the Raspberry Pi, and that is this Kintaro Heatsink. And I don't remember if I mentioned earlier or not, I am going to be using a custom heatsink with this, just because the little ones that were included with my case are just tiny and not the best at heat dissipation. I wanted to opt for something more, and that's why I bought this Kintaro heatsink. It is a custom heatsink, so there is a lot better heat dissipation. I think you'll see why once I take it out of the box here. So opening it up, we're going to find a plastic baggie, it looks like. And inside this baggie we got a few things. Here is the heatsink itself. It is all one solid piece of metal, and this is made especially for the Raspberry Pi 3B+. Make sure you get the right Raspberry Pi for your model, or make sure you get the right heatsink for your model of Raspberry Pi, else it might not fit. And so this one has been custom made to fit directly over just like that. And so this makes contact with both the GPU and the CPU here, and as you can see by its different level of protrusions to fit with the CPU and GPU, so it's making perfect contact with each. Like I said, this is a custom fit part, and a very quality one at that. I bought it from Amazon, and this one took the longest to ship just because I think the company is you know, a custom company, and they don't specialize in too many things other than like Raspberry Pi equipment. I will say though, there is a couple nicks on the aluminum, probably just from shipping damage, but not all too important to me as it will be covered by my case, so I think I should be fine. They also included some thermal compound, but I have brought my own today. I'll just be using this Cryorig thermal compound that I had left over from my CPU cooler. This I'm just not going to use. I don't know what it is, considering it's not labeled at all. Here is their little note here, and I'm going to focus on it so you can read it here if you wish. A little personalized note. It's kind of nice. Overall, no instructions though. I don't think they should be necessary. And then finally in here we have our screws for the for mounting the cooler. So I will be mounting this now, and we're going to be moving on to the part of the video where I will be putting everything together and building the Pi with the parts that I've shown you so far. So that was the last part. So without further ado, let's get into the building portion of the video. So first, you're going to take the bottom of your Eleduino case, if you bought the same case as me, and I already took the liberty of putting on the little silicone feet. I didn't want to do that for the video because I was OCD about it and had to stick them on in precisely the right place, but they just peel off of the sticker pad and stick on the bottom there. So we'll set that down there. Now your Raspberry Pi is just going to sit on top of it here, and you're just going to want to line the screw holes up just like that. And then I'm going to see right here if the screws that were included with the heatsink will work with this case. If not, I will try the ones that came with the case. Alright, I just learned a very important piece of information. The screws that are included with my heatsink, my Kintaro heatsink, they are slightly bigger than the screw holes for the Eleduino case. And so initially I thought I would just be using the Eleduino screws should the Kintaro screws not work with the Eleduino case. But the problem is, when you fit the Kintaro screws into the Eleduino screws into the Kintaro heatsink, they don't go very far down at all, actually. And so they don't even make contact with the Eleduino case. So with that piece of information learned, the Eleduino screws are not going to work with the Raspberry Pi and the Kintaro heatsink. So then I thought, okay, then I will just try screwing these down tighter than I normally would in order to kind of force them into the screw hole on the Eleduino case. That way it will hold it down securely and kind of fit to the size of the screw that came with the Kintaro CPU cooler. So just a word of caution, because these screws were not meant to fit in these screw holes. So you're just going to want to be delicate with it. You don't want to over tighten it, because you may just be crushing the Raspberry Pi, but you don't want to under tighten it so that the CPU cooler is not flush down. Luckily with the CPU cooler, the screws don't stick out that far from the Raspberry Pi, as you can see there. So they don't actually have to screw that far down onto the Eleduino case. They only have to screw enough to hold it there securely. And so that is what I'm going to be doing. So really quickly, I forgot to do this before, I'm really bad at doing this, but I will measure it for you just to prove that the dimensions are correct for this thing. First of all, it weighs about 24 grams, and it is the same dimensions as the Pi internally, as in this is going to fit in the same space that the Pi would take up. And there's the biggest thing: the height of the heatsink is at its highest point. Let me see where to measure here actually. At its highest point, I don't know if I'm getting a correct reading here. At its highest point, it should be 14 millimeters. At the Raspberry Pi's highest point, it is 19 millimeters. So as long as the case you are using has clearance for the top of the Raspberry Pi's ports, this heatsink should work in whatever case can fit the Raspberry Pi. And because it's the same size, it fits within the space of the board, it should fit in whatever Raspberry Pi case you try to fit it in. The only thing that is important, and that's what I ran into earlier, is the screws. Just make sure the screw hole is the right size on the case you plan to use, because otherwise you may have to screw it in tighter to kind of get a fit with the screw. And so right now I'm going to be applying the thermal paste to the heatsink, or sorry, to the Raspberry Pi. And you're going to want to not be very generous here, just a tiny drop on each of the Raspberry Pi's components here that it'll be touching, because that's all you're going to need. When you push the heatsink down on it, it will spread out over the processor anyway, so all you really need is a tiny drop. But first, I'm going to clean each surface with an alcohol swab, and this step isn't completely necessary, assuming you haven't touched the Raspberry Pi's board or the heatsink itself, but I've been handling them with a little bit of generosity. So I may have at some point touched the board itself or the heatsink. So I'm just going to clear it off with an alcohol swab here, making sure to clean off any fingerprints I left behind. And now to apply the thermal paste. Like I said, a very, very small amount is all you need, considering these processors are very tiny. They don't need too much thermal paste on here to function. So I would just be putting an itty bitty drop on each to ensure that there is thermal compound that will be spreading. Alright, so I have my compound on there now, and I'm going to cap this back up and get it out of my way. So now you're going to want to make contact with the heatsink, being careful not to touch the area you just alcohol swabbed. Line it up and firmly press down, kind of wiggle it just a little bit to get that thermal paste spread out on the board. Alright, now I'm going to be setting it on top of the case here and screwing it down, and I want to do the screws in a reverse diagonal pattern. And I will begin screwing now. And at this point you should have those two screws in, and if you've done everything correctly using this same heatsink and this same case, it should not move at all. There should be no budging anywhere on the Pi here, being generous and careful with your movements. So now I'm free to screw down the other two screws. Alright, so now the board, the Raspberry Pi is screwed down and the heatsink is on top of it, and it feels very solid. So we will be continuing with the rest of the case here now that we got everything on the base. I went ahead also installing the acrylic plate here that says Raspberry Pi. It's simple as peeling off the sticker and pushing it on, and I kind of like the look of it. The acrylic makes very good contrast with the aluminum, and only thing I can really complain about is the acrylic did come a little bit scratched up. I may end up using some sandpaper to rough it up a little bit. That way the scratches look intentional rather than just random, but that's for another day. So this did not come on the way I initially thought. It does not actually slide in. It actually, what you're going to want to do is there's a lip here, and what you do with that is push it down on one side and then kind of just roll the board over to the other side once you have the lip fully in on that side. Like that. It's a little bit tricky and it tends to slip if you don't have everything lined up perfectly, so just be patient with it and don't force anything because you may break the board if you're shoving too hard or anything. But that is for the most part the hardest part of this case. Now comes rather the easy part. So you're just going to turn on its side here and it'll stand up fine because it is flat on the other side. And you're just going to put this side with the TF port, that's where the SD card goes, and just line that up there, and then use the included screws with your Eleduino case and set those on top here. And do the same diagonal screwing pattern. Here isn't as necessary as it was on the board, so it doesn't really matter, but I tend to screw diagonally with any screws that have 4, if that makes sense. And now to the other side, and just line those up again and it should be pretty precise on this side with all the ports. This is a custom machine case, so everything should line up really nicely like it did for me, and this side should fit in even better, and it shouldn't want to fall out like the other side. And then you will use the included screws and do the same thing you did with the other side. And that does it. Now the entire Raspberry Pi build is complete. The building portion is done with this video, and this is the complete Raspberry Pi that I have built. And just make sure to pick up the parts that I have here so you can build one exactly like it, and I will have links for everything in the description for you if you want to build one just like mine here. And then I will just give you a final weight here and measurement of everything so you can see what it looks like. Alright, so the whole Raspberry Pi here without anything plugged in, and with the SD card of course, is going to be 181 grams, probably closer to 180, especially when I take the SD card out. And there we go. Yep, about right. So I will say too, the feet are pretty sticky on this thing. They were sticking to my scale here. Alright, and the final dimensions for the completed Raspberry Pi build are going to be 66 millimeters wide, about 91 millimeters long, and about 29, probably 30, about 29 millimeters tall. So a very, very small footprint for such an advanced gaming console. Alright, so that about wraps it up. Thank you all for watching. If you have any questions, please do leave them down in the comments. There's a lot that could be asked here. I showed a lot in this video, and there's probably a lot I didn't show that you're curious about, so please don't hesitate to ask in the comment section. I try to look at and answer every comment I see. Please like this video if you found it useful or interesting, and subscribe to my channel if you liked this one or want to see more videos like it. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.